Right, good morning everybody. Thank you as always for joining us this morning for another Vanilla IP webinar. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Lee Houston. I'm Head of Channel here at Vanilla IP. Very quick disclaimer, we're now in spring and I take it hay fever is set in already, so if it does go quiet for 20-30 seconds it's because I'm having a sneezing fit in the office, so slight pre-warning on that. But before we start this morning, I just a reminder or to inform existing partners that next week we are continuing our Class of 2019 program and running 2 days worth of training, which is actually in Manchester this time, which is fairly unusual for us. Most of it's usually in London. So we've got 2 days worth of sales training taking place on Tuesday and Wednesday, which is the 2nd and the 3rd. Day one will be all around the kind of standard feature set with an emphasis on sales techniques, making sure that we're asking the right questions, we're developing the opportunities and we're maximising our chances of success in those opportunities. Where day two, we take an in-depth examination of all things contact centre and is designed to ensure that when you leave that day, you are fully competent and confident to go and demonstrate and sell contact center, including Omnichannel, which is obviously the web chat, callback, etc. So get in touch with us ideally by the end of today. Spaces are limited, so please let me know if you've not done so already by the end of the day. And also at the end of the month we are running some marketing training to, again, part of that Class of 2019 program. So we did our first marketing training earlier on this year, which was a great success. We look at how to be successful in exhibitions, creating meaningful post social media interactions, etc. So it may be, if it's not you on this call, just please make your colleagues in the office aware that this has taken place. I say my email address is on there if you've not got it already, but contact me via by the end of the day for the sales training, or reach out to me regarding the marketing at the end of the month. You can see the happy smiling faces of people at the last event, which was earlier on this year. Cool. So moving on then to kind of today's agenda. I think, to set the scene, there is probably a misconception within the general reseller community that all BroadSoft platforms in the UK are the same, which, as we know, is vastly inaccurate, given that BroadSoft, as you can see on there, is just an application within the Vanilla IP portfolio, and so much more is delivered through these other applications, and primarily the UBOS platform, that actually makes our solution significantly different to other BroadSoft offerings in the market. But if we do, however, just take BroadSoft as that single element, it's our belief that we expose more of that BroadSoft capability than anybody else, specifically but not limited to what we do in the contact center space, the premium contact center, and all of the bells and whistles that come along with that. But in fairness to some other providers, it's not always the fact that we're exposing functionality from within the BroadSoft that they're not, but the fact that we've placed so much time and development in how that functionality can be consumed and made user friendly that sets us apart. Now, I'm sure most people have heard that statistic that 80% of customers only use 20% of available functionality, and we're not quite seeing that on our side, and that's mainly because it demonstrates to us that for other people that 80% of functionality isn't easy to consume, and that's where our focus is from a development perspective, because ultimately by ensuring that product penetration is high leads to a far greater user experience, lower churn, and ultimately from our side and your side as a reseller, far greater and higher ARPUs from a financial perspective. So our desire in this kind of, these short series of webinars called Not All BroadSoft Were Created Equal is to highlight just some of these differences, both in terms of what functionality is available, but also how that stands against other people in the industry and how we deliver that and make it a more user-friendly experience. Another good example of this was highlighted in the launch of the webinar, so hopefully you joined that a month or so ago when we launched Omnichannel Contact Center, which was a fairly significant leap forward in regards to delivering solutions that enables your customers to interact with their customers in ways other than just voice. So if you didn't get a chance to watch that webinar, it is still available on our YouTube channel and on the past webinars section on the Vanilla IP website. So do go and check that out. Some really great products there. But on the back of launching web chat and callback, we've had some great success and won some really good voice business due to our ability to now deliver these non-traditional voice products, which just highlights that whilst the BroadSoft is a fantastic dial tone, it's often what we're doing around the edges to enhance it that helps us win this high value, this high ARPU business. It's also probably worth pointing you to Ian's webinar that he did recently, where we outlined the Vanilla IP approach to creation, or rather how we enable partners to have full flexibility and ownership of their proposition, as opposed to this single user, single price scenario, which is causing margin erosion throughout the industry. But the purpose of today's session is to discuss specifically how we've enabled some of the hot desking capabilities, and specifically look at the capabilities around flexible working, how people operate from multiple locations. But before we dive into the products, I just wanted to talk just as an overview of hot desking, because I think if you to say that term to a number of people outside the industry, then they would probably jump to a vision of large call centers, hundreds of employees, headsets on, designated workspaces. And whilst that is true for a number of our large call center customers, we're also seeing a huge increase in hot desking in the SME sector, driven by this growing demand for flexibility in the way in which employees work. Now, going are the days where every single person is tied to their desk in a physical location with pictures of cats and picture frames sat in the corner. And we're now seeing more and more people, a bit like myself, with no fixed place of working, but all of the tools necessary to work just as productively as my desk-based colleagues. And when I do come to the office in Croydon, which isn't very often for obvious reasons, that I just genuinely find any desk that's available, and I make that mine for the day before heading back to Liverpool. And we're also seeing, people who are in shift workers, smaller companies, people such as estate agents, holiday booking companies are starting to implement hot desking, where historically every single user, every single person in the company had their own desk and their own device. So for those of you that have been working with Vanilla IP for some time, you're probably familiar with the previous way that we've delivered, the legacy way that we've delivered hot desking, which was through a process called hoteling. Now, whilst the service, delivered the desired functionality, there were without doubt some challenges around kind of that product set, namely because every device and every user required its own full-blown user license, which potentially for some customers made that solution not that cost effective, for those that wanted to streamline their operational efficiencies. And in that hoteling environment, because the host phones needed a user license, that meant that actually anybody could just rock up to that device and start making calls from it without those calls being associated to the user. They're actually associated to the phone. So what we're looking to focus on today is the revised way of delivering hot desking, and that's through a process called flexible seating, which is without doubt a far slicker, a far more cost-effective alternative to its predecessor, which, as I've just said, was hoteling. But firstly, let me just make clear a very key difference, and that is that in the flexible seating scenario, so the new scenario, every device that will be used by people to log into will in essence be a flexible seating guest. No change there. However, unlike hoteling, the device itself cannot be used to make calls until a user logs into it. Naturally, they can still make emergency 999 calls are still permitted for obvious reasons. However, for somebody to use that device to make standard business calls, they must first log into it. And that's important for a whole host of reasons, one of which is compliancy. Now, I won't go too deep on GDPR, MiFID II today. I'll leave that for Ian Sinnett, whose favourite 4 letters are GDPR, and we're going to run a separate webinar on compliancy. But for customers that are in that MiFID II world, it is imperative that those calls are recorded. So they've got a couple of options. They either record every single user in the business, which isn't always required. But for the users that are the calls that are needed to be recorded, the safest option for them is in hoteling. Is in the flexible seating world, where in order for them to make calls, they have to log into a device. Therefore, all of those calls are now recorded. All of those calls are associated, and interactions are associated with that user and not just the device. I suppose the second key difference with flexible seating as opposed to hoteling is that when I do log into that device, it will automatically pull through all of my programmed BLF keys that I've got set up on my Yealink at home, which is really neat. So going back to that user experience, I can now rock up to the office in Croydon, log into one of the devices in a number of ways, which I'll show you in a second, and within a couple of seconds, all of my BLFs have been pulled through. So from an efficiency perspective, I can now work just as productively in any of our offices or any of our locations, because I'm working exactly the same way as I do when I'm in my primary working space, which is my home office. Another problem with hot desking as a general concept is that actually in most instances it requires users to remember their credentials, username, password, etc., which for an IT manager can be an absolute nightmare, asking salespeople to remember things. And IT managers end up spending most of their time sending new credentials, reminding people of their login details. So what we try to do is, again, with an emphasis on the user experience, is to try and make that as simple as possible to deliver the functionality, but do so in a way that isn't so labor intensive for the end user. And there's a couple of different ways which you can access flexible seating on the platform. So let me just jump in and actually show you. So first of all, I'll show you how I access flexible seating. So I mentioned that I'm based at home, but when I come into the office in Croydon, the first thing I do is fire up my Unity application on my laptop. You're all probably familiar with Unity. If you're not and joining us fresh today, then there's plenty of webinars that we've done on that, and come speak to us about it. But I've got a couple of options in here. The quickest way and the simplest way, which is genuinely 2 clicks to turn any phone into my phone, is I hover over this My Status button here. We click on that. I move down to connect to a device. This will now show me all of the available flexible seating guest phones that are in our office. So I'll select one of these, click it. That phone in a couple of seconds will then be my phone. It will start ringing when people call me. My outbound calls will be recorded, and all of my BLFs will be present on that screen. But another problem, again, just generally with hot desking, is that so many times people forget to log out. They get back on the train, head back up to Liverpool like I do, and the next morning they're sat there wondering why they're having such a quiet day before they realise that actually the phone in the office they forgot to log out of, and that's still ringing down in Croydon. So with just a couple more clicks from within the same application, I can jump to settings, and I can jump down to flexible seating guest. I get the same list of phones, so I'm going to pick one of the devices. This time it now gives me an association limit. So in this instance, I know that I'm going to be in Croydon for the next 6 hours, and I'm going to make flexible seating guest phone 9119 my phone for the next 6 hours, at which point it will prompt me to say that your time is up. Do you want to stay associated with the phone? So if I am still working, I can say yes, like keep me logged in. Or alternatively, if I just pack up for the day and leave, it will then automatically log me out. So come tomorrow morning, I will be working as I was prior to coming into the office. It's also fair to say that actually, if I was to connect to a device here, and then I was to try to shut Unity down, do you want to close Unity? Yes. It says you're currently connected to a host device, flexible guest. Would you like to remove this assignment? So even if I'm closing my laptop, but I'm going to be working on that desk for a couple more hours, I can actually say no, keep that phone ringing. But in this instance, we'll say yes, and we'll remove that association. So that's option 1 of how to access flexible seating, how to log into a device. Option 2 may be appropriate for a couple more people, and that's to do so via UBOS, or maybe it's the IT manager in the business that somebody doesn't have their laptop, or for whatever reason they can't remember their credentials, so they want to do it via UBOS. I'm going to do it by jumping straight down into me in a user level via this pre-programmed hot button here. So this will take me through into my personal configuration, and then when I get there, I'm going to jump into service config, which again, because the level that I'm at, will bring up all of the available functionality for me as a user. Don't get scared by the amount of things that I've got here. I've got every feature known to man. And I'm going to find flexible seating, which is, there we go, flexible seating guest. The green button tells me that I'm able to assign it. And again, same list. I'm going to select my phone from here. So 515 in this instance. I'm going to make it 6 hours. I'm going to hit the button to enforce that limit, and I'm going to hit save. That device will now be my device for the next 6 hours. So for those that maybe aren't using Unity, or as I say, for an IT manager, or even your own personal setup, if you use UBoss a lot, then that's an alternative. And then the third way is probably a slightly more traditional way of doing it, and that's via the handset. So let's just jump back into here and go to there. If once a phone has been assigned as a flexible seating guest phone, then you will have this flex in button, this guest in button here. So as you can see, the phone itself is actually there's nothing else displayed on there. I can't do it. I don't have the access, the ability to view a directory, to make a call, any of that. The only thing I can do from here is flex in. So once I tick that button, it asks me for my user ID, which is my extension in this instance, and then my 4 or 5 digit password, depending on how that's set. So I type those in. Again, it takes a couple of seconds, and once it's done, it will then fire up all of my BLFs. And that phone is my phone, and you'll see on the bottom left hand side, when I'm ready to leave the office, I've not associated a time limit, I'm ready to leave, so I'm simply going to flex out, which will give me the prompt, are you sure you want to flex out? I hit OK, and that phone is now back to being just a standard, dumb terminal, essentially. So I've given you there 3 options. Horses for courses. The simplest, most user-friendly is without doubt doing it via Unity. No credentials are required for the end user to remember. It's 2 clicks to take over that device. Option 2 is you do it via UBoss. And the third and final option, as I've just showed you there, you can do it via guesting in or flexing in on the phone. So in terms of a license requirement, how much does it cost, all of that sort of stuff, speak to your account manager. That will give you the monetary value associated with these licenses. We don't want to give all of our secrets away on a public webinar. But there are 2 requirements. There is a business requirement, which is flexible seating group. You assign that at group level. And then under that, you associate all of the devices which you now want to be flexible seating host phones. And then from a user perspective, they need the flexible seating guest license, which is most commonly associated from within the mobility pack, which obviously comes with all of the other, the features that are in there. So really simple to price, really simple to deploy. A group service done at business level, and then you add your phones underneath it. You're charged per phone, substantially cheaper than hoteling, as I mentioned earlier. And then from a user perspective, actually, if they've already got that mobility pack, then that gives them the ability to go and log in to these devices. So that pretty much concludes this morning's webinar. What was that, 20 minutes? That's got to be a record. Same as always, download, add this to your own internal environment. Get yourself really comfortable with it. Go away and watch our previous webinars on Omnichannel. Contact us about the training next week. And if you've got any questions on today's webinar or the functionality, then feel free to contact me afterwards. Have a great day.